They made her sit in the back, said it was for balance, took her brother's birthday cupcake and threw it in the trash, told her mother to be quiet, threatened to have her father removed. And through it all, they smiled like it was just policy. This isn't a story about turbulence at 30,000 feet. This is about something far worse. Something that boarded the plane long before takeoff and hid behind a perfect smile, a pressed uniform, and a clipboard full of rules. She didn't fight back. Not at first. But when she finally stood, everything changed. Because sometimes the person you try to humiliate in silence is the one who ends up making the entire world listen. What happened on this flight? Why did it end in headlines, apologies, and firings before the plane even touched down? And who, exactly, is the girl in seat 8F, the one they all tried to ignore until it was too late? Watch until the end to find out what happens when injustice flies first class and meets its reckoning in the most unexpected way. If you're ready for a story that punches through silence and lands where it hurts, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. What moment shocked you most? And where in the world are you watching from? Let's talk about what happens when the sky isn't the limit, but the stage. The soft hum of the engines reverberated gently through the luxury-stuffed silence of first class as James Brooks helped his wife, Camille, place their carry-ons in the overhead bin. Their two children, Layla, 14, and Liam, 9, slipped into their leather seats with quiet awe, the warm cabin lights reflecting in their eyes. The Brooks family didn't dress flashy or loud. James wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a navy turtleneck, Camille a beige shawl with pearl earrings that caught light without flaunting wealth. Their presence was graceful but reserved, like people used to moving through elite spaces while drawing as little attention as possible. Layla fished a protein bar from her tote and passed it to Liam, who giggled as he tore it open. "Remember what I said?" Camille whispered gently, smoothing her daughter's braid. "Chew with your mouth closed in first class." Layla laughed, nodding. "I know, Mom." Across the aisle, a woman in designer sunglasses glanced up from her tablet and did a double take before hiding it behind her screen. The silence of polished leather and muted jazz was suddenly split by the sharp click of heels. Emma Holland, the lead flight attendant, glided down the aisle like she owned the air. Blonde bun tight, smile tighter. She paused when she reached 2C. Her eyes flicked over the family, zeroing in on Layla, who just pressed the call button. "Yes," Emma said with clipped cheerfulness. Layla looked up, polite but hopeful. "Could I have a glass of water, please?" Emma's smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Water," she repeated, as if Layla had just requested a bottle of wine on a children's menu. Then, in a tone pitched just high enough to carry 2 rows over, she added, "This isn't a water station, sweetheart. First class isn't where we hand out charity cups." Layla blinked. Camille's brows furrowed as she turned slightly in her seat. "Excuse me," she said, her voice firm but soft. Emma turned to her, smile frosting into something colder. "I'm just making sure everyone's in the right cabin. Sometimes the system glitches during check-in, especially on full flights like this." James, who had been quietly flipping through a travel magazine, lowered it slowly. "Are you implying we're in the wrong seats?" Emma didn't answer. Instead, she looked down at her tablet, tapping meaninglessly. The silence thickened. A man in 1A cleared his throat loudly and smirked without looking up from his whiskey. Liam shifted in his seat, the light in his eyes dimming. Camille took his hand, squeezing it under the blanket. "We booked this flight 2 months ago," James said, his voice calm but dangerous. "Checked it online. We're exactly where we're supposed to be." Emma gave him a brittle nod. "I'm just verifying. Protocol, sir." And with that, she turned and walked away. The weight of what had just happened settled like fog across their row. Layla looked down at her shoes, white sneakers slightly scuffed from school, then back at her mom. Her voice was small. "I just wanted water." Camille reached out and brushed her cheek. "You didn't do anything wrong." James didn't speak. He stared ahead, his jaw locked, his knuckles pale where they gripped the armrest. It wasn't about water. It never was. The thing that stung wasn't just the words Emma used. It was the tone, the timing. the way she turned a simple request into a public moment of humiliation. A reminder. Layla pulled her blanket up to her chin, curling into herself. Emma reappeared minutes later, handing champagne to a white couple in 3B and 3C who had boarded after the Brooks family. Her laugh rang out, polished, familiar, practiced. She didn't even glance their way. The curtain to the galley swished shut behind her. James leaned forward, elbows on knees. He didn't say a word, but Camille could read the tension running through his frame like a coiled spring. This wasn't the first time, and they both knew it wouldn't be the last. But Layla, this might be the first time it cut deep. Deep enough to shape how she saw the world. Deep enough to hurt for a long time. Camille looked at her daughter, and for a second, she saw herself at that age, in a school hallway being asked by a teacher if she was lost. The pain echoed through generations. Camille swallowed it like stone. "James," she said quietly, "let it go. Not here." But James shook his head slowly. "They humiliate our daughter over water," he whispered, "and they smile while doing it." Layla said nothing. Her eyes were glued to the window now, to the tarmac lights flickering like distant lighthouses on a dark sea. She didn't wipe the tear that slid down her cheek. She let it fall. Her fingers reached up to unfasten the family bracelet from her wrist, a simple silver chain engraved with their family motto, "Rise quietly. Strike when ready." She tucked it into her hoodie pocket, eyes hardening. Something was changing inside her. The seatbelt sign blinked off with a familiar chime, and passengers began loosening their belts, some reclining, others reaching for drinks. But the Brooks family remained still. Layla stared out the window, the silver bracelet absent from her wrist, her thoughts heavy, while James sat rigid, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on his knee. Camille's arm stayed around Liam, who had been unusually quiet since the earlier exchange. But now, sensing a moment of peace, he wriggled gently and reached for the drawstring bag by his feet. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible over the hum of the engines, "can I open it now?" Camille nodded and offered a soft smile, though her eyes still carried the weight of that water incident. "Of course, baby. It's your birthday." James turned to his son and managed a small grin, his voice low but sincere. "Happy 9th, champ." Layla turned as well, forcing brightness into her expression as she leaned over to ruffle his hair. "You've been waiting all morning to open that, huh?" Liam nodded eagerly, pulling out a small Tupperware container wrapped in a napkin. Inside it, a homemade red velvet cupcake, his favorite, frosted lovingly with a swirl of blue icing and a single unlit candle taped to the lid. "It's perfect," he said, eyes wide. Camille leaned in and whispered, "You can have it now, but we'll light the candle after landing, okay?" But as Liam unsnapped the container with innocent joy, a sharp voice sliced through the moment. "Excuse me," Emma said, appearing once again like a shadow cast from nowhere, her smile gone and replaced with institutional frost. "You can't have outside food in first class." James's head jerked toward her, his tone firm but even. "It's a cupcake. For his birthday." Camille's hand protectively moved in front of Liam. "He has food allergies," she added softly. "We made this so he'd be safe." Emma crossed her arms, unimpressed. "The rules are clear, no outside food. Especially items with frosting. Strong smells disturb other passengers." Without waiting for a response, she reached forward, snatched the container from Liam's lap, and with a single motion, dropped it into the trash cart she had been dragging behind her. "What are you doing?" Camille gasped, rising slightly in her seat. Liam froze, his mouth parted in shock, hands still in the motion of holding what was no longer there. Emma responded without looking at him. "I'll make sure he gets something from the onboard menu instead." Her tone made it sound like a favor, like a punishment dressed up as hospitality. Layla's face contorted, rage blooming across her features. "You didn't have to do that," she snapped, but James raised a hand gently, restraining her without words. Camille sat back down slowly, her eyes never leaving Emma. Liam turned away, burying his face against the window, his small shoulders trembling. Camille leaned forward, reaching for her purse and pulling out a tissue with trembling hands, dabbing gently at his cheek. "It's okay, sweetheart," she murmured, but Liam didn't answer. James took a deep breath, His jaw locked so tight the muscles along his neck bulged. He looked across the aisle, locking eyes with a passenger who had witnessed the entire thing, an older man in a three-piece suit, who simply adjusted his tie and turned away. The silence in their section returned, but now it was sharp, oppressive, like walking through air heavy with needles. Emma didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She moved down the aisle as if nothing had happened, offering champagne to the next row with an overly sweet tone. "Would you like a refill, Mr. Pritchard?" Layla watched her go, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweatshirt so tightly the fabric strained. "I hate her," she muttered under her breath, her voice raw. She did it on purpose. Camille turned to her daughter, her expression soft but exhausted. "She wants us angry. Don't give her what she wants." But Layla wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the trash cart parked just ahead in the galley, its metal lid slightly ajar, revealing a glimpse of blue icing now smeared against the side of a plastic liner. Liam hadn't moved, hadn't spoken. The candle remained in his hand, still taped to its lid, the only part of his birthday gift that had survived. Camille took it gently and slipped it into her purse, her movements reverent, like handling something sacred. Across the cabin, a flight attendant named Ben lingered at the curtain separating first from business class, his brows drawn as he watched. He had seen everything, but said nothing. Yet, for now, silence ruled. But under it, something had changed. Not just in Layla, not just in James, in all of them. Something bitter had taken root, wrapping itself around the throat of what was supposed to be a peaceful family trip. The damage wasn't loud, but it was lasting. Layla kept her gaze on the galley where the cupcake had been dumped, her stomach tight, her hands trembling inside her hoodie pocket. The air in first class, meant to be luxurious and quiet, now felt poisoned. Every smile from the flight crew, every clink of a wine glass, every seatbelt click sounded too loud, too fake. Then came the voice again, smooth, clipped, disturbingly cheerful. Emma was back. "Mr. Brooks," she said, addressing James but making eye contact with no one, "I'm afraid we're having a slight balance issue on this flight. We need to redistribute weight in the cabin to maintain center alignment." James furrowed his brow, glancing instinctively at Camille, who looked up with weary suspicion. "Excuse me," he said, his voice flat. "It's a safety measure," Emma explained quickly, as if rehearsed. "We just need a few guests to relocate for balance. You too," she pointed at James and Camille, "will be moved 2 rows back. And your daughter," her hand waved toward Layla like she was directing baggage, "will be reseated in 8F. It's still first class, technically." Camille's voice hardened. "You're separating a minor from her family?" Emma's smile didn't waver. "It's not far. And it's only for the duration of the flight." Layla looked up, her heart thudding. "I don't want to move," she said quickly, barely above a whisper. Emma ignored her. "The cabin crew will assist with your carry-ons." "Wait," James interrupted, rising slowly from his seat, his broad frame drawing attention from nearby passengers. "You're telling me that with all the empty seats here, you're relocating us for balance? My family? Separately?" Emma's smile faltered. "Sir, please. There's no need to escalate this. It's a protocol situation, nothing more." But James didn't back down. "Then why are the other families still seated together?" he asked, his voice sharpening like the edge of a blade. Emma took a step forward, lowered her voice, and said coldly, "I need your cooperation. Don't make this harder than it has to be." The phrase wasn't loud, but it cut. James glanced down at Camille, who gave the faintest shake of her head. "Not here. Not now. Not yet." Defeated for the moment, he nodded. "Fine." Camille rose wordlessly, gathering Liam, who clung to her like a shadow. Layla moved last, rising from her seat like someone being sentenced. She hugged her backpack close to her chest, stepping into the aisle where the spotlight of judgment burned hotter than ever. Emma gestured forward with 2 fingers like she was directing traffic. 8F, just along the far wall. Layla walked slowly past the curtained galley, past row after row of perfectly pampered passengers, past a group of middle-aged women sipping Chardonnay, who fell into silence as she passed, one of them whispering behind a manicured hand. Why would they even put her up here? A man in 6D chuckled under his breath, loud enough for Layla to hear. She looks more comfortable near the back, anyway. Her stomach flipped. Her grip on her backpack tightened until her knuckles ached. She found the seat, 8F, last row of first class, pressed near the partition wall, the only one with a broken tray table and a missing pillow. She slid into it without a word, trying to disappear into the seat cushions, trying not to cry. From her new angle, she could barely see her family. James sat turned halfway in his seat, trying to keep her in view, but the curtain hung half-drawn now, like a velvet wall cutting them apart. Camille mouthed something Layla couldn't hear. Liam looked confused, his hand reaching out in Layla's direction before Camille gently pulled it down. Layla turned to the window, where her own reflection looked unfamiliar, shrunken, smaller, dimmer. She pulled her hood over her head, and for the first time, she wished she had said no louder, said more, said anything. But the damage was done. Emma strutted back toward the galley, proud of her solution, her composure perfectly intact. To her, it had been just another seating adjustment, just another detail. But to Layla, that walk to row 8F was a march of shame. Layla remained curled into the curve of seat 8F, her cheek pressed against the cool window as she tried to drown out the memory of being marched to the edge of first class like she didn't belong. Her hoodie shielded her from the low stairs, but it couldn't keep out the sting of separation. From where she sat, she couldn't hear much, but she could still see barely. Her family, a few rows ahead, broken apart, scattered like unwanted pieces on a pristine white tablecloth. Camille had switched seats with James so she could sit beside Liam again, and now the little boy was leaning against her shoulder, his eyes fighting the weight of exhaustion. She gently hummed a soft melody, the same lullaby she used to sing when the kids were toddlers, a quiet song only they knew, something passed down from Camille's grandmother, the kind of thing that wrapped a child in peace. Her voice was low, tender, nearly inaudible beneath the whir of the air vents, but apparently not quiet enough for Emma Holland. The flight attendant reappeared, moving down the aisle like a warden doing midnight rounds, her presence sudden and chilling. She stopped beside Camille's row, folding her arms tightly against her crisp uniform. "Excuse me," she said, her voice sharp as glass. Camille blinked up, startled by the sudden interruption. "Is something wrong?" Emma didn't smile. "This is a quiet cabin, ma'am. First class maintains a no disruption policy after takeoff. If your child needs noise, perhaps economy would be a better fit." James turned immediately, rising from his seat without hesitation. "She's not making noise. She's whispering to our son. He's trying to sleep," he said, his tone controlled but edged with fury. Emma didn't back down. Instead, she took a deliberate step back and reached for her radio. "Cabin, this is lead attendant requesting support at 2A. Passenger exhibiting signs of verbal escalation and potential noncompliance." Camille's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice rising just above a whisper, more out of disbelief than fear. James's fists clenched at his sides, and for a moment Layla, still watching from the distance, feared her father might finally explode. He didn't. He stood his ground, breathing hard, staring at Emma as if daring her to speak again. Passengers nearby turned their heads, pretending to adjust pillows or close laptop lids, but their eyes were locked on the unfolding tension, hungry for drama dressed in silk and silence. Within moments, 2 attendants approached. One was the younger steward, Ben, the other a large man with a service manager badge pinned to his lapel. "Is there an issue here?" the manager asked. Emma immediately launched into her version. "The gentleman became aggressive when I asked his wife to respect cabin quiet time. His tone was raised. I followed protocol." "Aggressive," James repeated, his voice still low, but heavy with incredulity. "You barged into a moment between my wife and son and tried to shame her for singing to him." Camille stood now too, her eyes shining but not with tears, with fury. "You humiliated our daughter, took our son's birthday cake, moved our seats, and now you're calling security on my husband because I sang to a sleepy child." The manager hesitated. Ben looked like he wanted to say something, but didn't. The moment hovered there, taut and dangerous. Then Layla, still watching, slipped quietly from her seat and began walking toward her parents. Her feet felt heavy, her heartbeat too loud in her ears. As she approached, Emma turned. "Miss, you need to return to your seat. This doesn't concern you." Layla didn't stop. She walked past Emma, past the service manager, and reached for her father's hand. "If they're going to take someone," she said quietly, "take me too." James looked down at his daughter, stunned, but said nothing. Her grip was small, but it felt like steel. The manager raised a hand. "Let's calm this down," he said, his tone finally shifting, more human than official. "There's no need for further escalation." Emma stood frozen, her face pale, but her jaw set, as if still convinced that she had done everything by the book. "We'll review this after landing," the manager said, nodding stiffly. "Everyone back to seats, please." Layla returned to her isolated chair, her shoulders stiffer now, her eyes hard. James sat slowly, his arm wrapped protectively around Camille and Liam, who had stirred and was now fully awake, confused, eyes glassy. "Why did she yell at us?" he asked. Camille didn't answer. She just held him tighter. Emma turned and walked away without another word. Layla sat again in seat 8F, her hoodie now down, her hair a little messy from the friction against the seat. Her hands were still trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she'd swallowed since boarding. With a slow breath, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a sketchbook, thick with pencil marks and pressed flowers she'd hidden inside pages weeks ago. She placed it gently on her tray table, flipped past drawings of trees, cityscapes, and faces she only half remembered, then stopped at a blank page. She picked up a graphite pencil, the tip dulled but comforting in her grip, and began to draw. Not because she was calm, but because she was unraveling. 2 rows ahead, Liam was tucked into Camille's side, his energy drained, his questions buried under the exhaustion of being silenced so many times in a single day. James sat rigid beside them, his arm across the back of Camille's seat, his eyes burning holes into the curtain that separated them from the cockpit. No one spoke, no one dared, until she came back. Emma's heels clicked against the floor again, her stride a metronome of authority that didn't waver, not even as whispers followed in her wake. She walked past the other passengers with a smile, a refill, a folded blanket, then stopped cold in front of Layla. "Miss," she said sharply, as if addressing a trespasser rather than a child. Layla looked up, the pencil still in her hand. "Yes," she replied, careful to sound calm. Emma pointed to the tray table, to the open book. "You'll need to put that away." Layla blinked. "It's just a sketchbook. I'm not using electronics or anything." Emma's tone iced over. "This is first class. It's not appropriate to clutter your space. It reflects poorly on the cabin." Layla swallowed hard. "It's my seat. This is the tray it comes with." "Exactly," Emma snapped. "A tray, not a desk, not a playroom." And before Layla could respond, Emma reached forward and shoved the sketchbook off the tray, letting it drop to the floor with a slap that turned heads 3 rows up. The pencil rolled out onto the aisle, tapping softly against a passenger's shoe. For a second, no one moved. Then Liam, who had seen the entire thing from the corner of his eye, slipped out from under Camille's arm and knelt in the aisle to grab it. "Liam, wait," Camille started, but too late. As he reached for the book, Emma leaned down and swept it sideways with the tip of her shoe, kicking it just out of his reach. "Please don't touch that," she said briskly. "We'll have cleaning take care of it later." The words fell like stones, and the silence that followed cracked open something deep. Layla stood up slowly, her body taut as a bowstring. "That's mine," she said, her voice shaking, not from weakness, but restraint. "You didn't have to touch it. You didn't have to touch my brother." "Miss, sit down," Emma ordered, suddenly all business. This attitude is becoming inappropriate. But she hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't cursed. She hadn't stood in defiance. She had simply existed in protest, and that, to Emma, was the real violation. Camille had risen now too, walking toward her daughter with slow, deliberate steps. She crouched, picked up the sketchbook herself, then ran her fingers along the crease in the spine where it had bent on impact. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. James, who had watched the entire scene from just behind them, stood as well. He didn't rush forward. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He stood, tall and still, his eyes locked on Emma like a man measuring the weight of everything he hadn't done yet. Then he sat back down. But the damage was visible. The judgment in the eyes of the other passengers shifted ever so slightly. Someone finally whispered, "That was too far." Someone else muttered, "It's just a damn notebook." But Emma pretended not to hear. She pivoted and walked away like nothing had happened, her spine stiff, her silence louder than any justification. Layla sat again, this time with her sketchbook clutched against her chest. Camille brushed her daughter's hair away from her face and kissed the crown of her head. "She doesn't know who you are," she whispered. Layla hadn't touched her sketchbook again. It now sat zipped inside her bag, safe but scarred, a small symbol of everything she'd been forced to swallow since takeoff. James hadn't spoken in over 15 minutes, but Camille could feel the storm boiling behind his silence. His hand now a closed fist resting on his thigh, unmoving, carved from restraint. She sat beside him, her hand over Liam's chest, feeling the subtle rise and fall of his breath as he finally dozed off after everything. But even his sleep seemed restless. The hush was broken not by conversation or service, but by another blow, this time delivered through cold implication. Emma returned, no longer attempting politeness, her heels punctuating every step with cold intent. She paused just in front of James, arms crossed, voice crisp. "Sir," she began, her tone loud enough for several rows to hear, "you've repeatedly disrupted cabin service, verbally challenged flight staff, and created an atmosphere of hostility. If this continues, I'll have no choice but to request security assistance upon landing." James looked up slowly, his eyes sharp, and said with deliberate calm, "You created this atmosphere." Emma didn't flinch. "You've been confrontational since boarding. I'm simply following protocol." Her gaze shifted momentarily toward Camille and Layla before returning. "We reserve the right to deny service to passengers who present a risk to crew safety." "A risk," Camille repeated, her voice suddenly breaking through the rising tide of disbelief. "You called my husband a risk because he asked you not to insult me? Because he dared to exist in a seat you think we don't deserve?" Emma's jaw tightened, but before she could respond, Layla rose from her seat in the rear of first class. She stood in the aisle again, this time without trembling, without fear. "You don't get to paint us as dangerous just because we didn't let you bully us," she said clearly, her voice cutting through the tension like a bell. Emma turned to face her, her posture stiff, perhaps preparing to issue yet another empty warning. But then a new voice entered the fray, a voice no one expected. "That's enough." The words came from seat 1A. Slowly, deliberately, a man in his 60s stood up. He wore a charcoal suit without a wrinkle, his posture tall and unshakable. His silver hair was slicked back with casual precision, his expression unreadable. Emma blinked. "Sir, please return to your seat." "No," he said, louder this time, cutting her off. "Emma, that's enough." The cabin grew silent. Even the clink of cutlery ceased as every head turned. The man took a slow step forward. "Let's make one thing clear. I'm Richard Hale, Chairman and Chief Executive of Sky Dominion Aviation." Murmurs rippled through the first-class cabin like the beginning of a storm. Emma's face lost color. Richard continued without pause. "I've spent the last 2 months conducting quiet evaluations across multiple flights, disguised, unnoticed, until today. I've seen some concerning things. But what I've seen here," his eyes locked on Emma, "is systemic. It's targeted, and it's personal." James stared at him, stunned. Camille's mouth parted, unsure if this was real. Richard turned slightly, his voice lowering. "James Brooks is one of our company's co-founders, one of the original minds behind this airline's success. His investments and vision helped launch Sky Dominion into global service. Camille, Layla, and Liam are his family. That means they're mine too." Emma took a step back, her lips moving but no sound escaping. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her hand. "You have treated this family with contempt, disrespect, and prejudice. And you've done so in full view of every passenger here. Richard said, sweeping a look across the cabin, daring anyone to deny it. No one did. You've weaponized rules, distorted safety protocols, and humiliated children to assert dominance over people you didn't think belonged. He stopped in front of James and extended a hand. I'm sorry, James. I should have stepped in sooner. James stood and shook it, his voice hoarse. I didn't expect backup, but I'm glad you're here. I wasn't just here to observe, Richard said quietly. I was here to act if needed, and now it's needed. Emma finally spoke, her voice cracking. I didn't know, but Layla interrupted her. She had stepped forward beside her father now, chin raised, expression calm. You didn't care, she said simply. That's worse. The silence that followed was heavier than anything before it. Emma looked around, suddenly alone in a room full of judgment, her authority evaporating like mist under sunlight. No one moved to defend her. Not the flight crew. Not the passengers she had smiled at. Not even the man in 3B who had chuckled at Layla earlier. Richard turned to the manager. Take her off duty. Effective immediately. Yes, sir, came the quick reply. Layla turned to Emma one last time. Would you like to see my boarding pass now? She asked. Her tone was soft, but the impact was thunder. Her eyes darted between Richard, James, and the silent wall of passengers whose expressions had shifted from indifference to cold awareness. I didn't know, she repeated, her voice cracking, desperate to find some thread of justification to cling to. I was following protocol. I wasn't told who they were. There was no notice. But the room didn't move. It didn't flinch. It didn't forgive. It's not about who they are, Richard replied, his voice low but steady, every syllable measured like a final verdict. It's about how you treated them. You don't get to hide behind protocol when every decision you made today was laced with bias and cruelty. You didn't need to know their names to know they were human. Emma's face contorted, a mix of indignation and panic rising to the surface. I didn't mean to offend anyone, she tried, almost pleading, though her tone still had that habitual sharpness that had already betrayed her too many times. The seating adjustment was for safety. The food rule is company policy. The sketchbook was clutter. She paused, catching her breath, as if she believed sheer repetition would grant her redemption. I didn't know they were important. And that was the line, the one that shattered any illusion left. Camille straightened where she stood, eyes blazing, voice clear and slicing. So, if we weren't important, what then? We deserve to be humiliated? Our children deserve to be shamed? Is that what you're saying? Emma flinched as if slapped. That's not what I meant. But it's exactly what you did, James said, every word carved from restraint. From the moment we stepped on this plane, you treated us like problems, not passengers. I've been with this airline for 12 years, Emma snapped, her voice rising in one last grasp for control. I've always enforced the rules. I've never had a single formal complaint. Then, from behind, a quiet voice entered the scene. That's not true. Everyone turned. Ben, the junior attendant, had stepped forward. He was younger, softer spoken, his expression conflicted but resolute. He looked at Emma, not with cruelty, but with quiet disappointment. There've been complaints, he said, holding up a slim black company-issued tablet. They just never went anywhere. Emma's mouth opened, then closed again. Richard turned to Ben. Go on. Ben nodded and tapped the screen. I was ordered to shadow Emma this entire flight. This wasn't just a routine check. We've been gathering patterns, audio, service logs. But I also brought my own recorder. I wanted the truth. He pulled from his pocket a small device, no bigger than a key fob, and handed it to Richard. It's all here. Everything. The tone she used with Layla. The cupcake. The way she separated the family. The call to security. It's all recorded. Time-stamped. Emma's face drained of color. You recorded me. You recorded yourself, Ben corrected softly. I just preserved it. For the first time, Emma stepped back, literally retreating from the group, as if the weight of proof physically pushed her away. Passengers stared now, with fuller understanding, their murmurs no longer hushed. One woman muttered, I knew something was off. A man 2 rows back added, she tried that with my niece last year. We didn't know how to report it. Richard held the device up without even pressing play. "This will go straight to corporate, HR, compliance, ethics, and more importantly, the board." "You can't," Emma began, but he cut her off. "Oh, we can. And we will." Camille stepped forward again, this time gentler. "We didn't ask for this," she said. "We didn't want to make a scene. We just wanted peace." Layla looked at Emma now, not with hatred, but with something colder, disappointment. "You looked at me and saw a problem. You looked at my family and saw a mistake in the system. But we were never the problem. You were." Emma didn't respond. Her eyes were locked on the device in Richard's hand, as if it were a weapon. And maybe it was. Not one that fired bullets, but one that ended careers. "Go sit down, Emma," Richard said finally. "You're done here." Ben stepped aside, giving her the aisle. Her steps were slow now, heavy, uncertain. The power she once walked with was gone, stripped away with the same efficiency she had used to strip dignity from others. She sat in the crew jump seat near the back, isolated, forgotten. No one looked at her. No one thanked her for her service. In the quiet that followed, James sat again beside his wife, taking her hand in his. Camille reached for Liam, brushing his hair back, as if reminding herself that he was safe, that this fight, this long, exhausting flight, had meaning. Captain Alan Greaves. He adjusted the wings pinned on his chest and removed his hat slowly, deliberately, before scanning the cabin with calm, composed eyes. When those eyes settled on the Brooks family, every passenger knew something more was about to shift. He stepped forward down the aisle, steady as a tide, pausing only briefly beside Richard Hale, giving him a respectful nod, then addressed the family directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks," he began, his voice deep and gravel-lined with age. "On behalf of this crew and this airline, I want to personally apologize for everything you've been put through today." Camille blinked, taken off guard by the weight of the words. James responded first, standing and offering a nod. "Thank you," he said, quietly but firmly. "It means something, hearing that from the front of the plane." The captain turned to Layla, who had frozen mid-sketch, her pencil hovering above the page. "Miss Brooks," he continued, with a softer tone, "you should never have been made to feel less than anyone else aboard this aircraft. We failed you. That's not what this uniform stands for." Layla didn't speak, but her throat bobbed as she swallowed something tight and bitter that had been lodged there since takeoff. She lowered her pencil. The captain faced the rest of the passengers now, his voice rising just enough. This flight experienced a breakdown, not mechanical, not navigational, but human. And it started with judgment. No one said a word. No one needed to. Everyone understood what he meant. From row 1A to 8F, every face had seen the unfolding in real time, and now they were being asked to confront what they had seen in silence. "As captain of this aircraft," Greaves continued, "I'm required to maintain the safety and dignity of every soul on board. That responsibility includes confronting the moments we fail to live up to that standard." He turned to Richard. "Chairman Hale, I trust you've already begun the internal process." Richard nodded once, sharp and clean. "Effective immediately. Emma Holland will be placed on administrative leave pending full review by corporate ethics, legal, and DEI compliance. And I've already informed the board of directors. This flight's entire incident log will be public by tomorrow." A ripple went through the cabin, not loud, but undeniable. The weight of consequences had begun to descend. The captain didn't stop there. He walked to the intercom and pressed the overhead PA button. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, now addressing not just first class, but every passenger on board. "This is your captain speaking. We have just passed cruising altitude and are en route to Los Angeles on time. However, I must take a moment to address an incident that occurred in our first-class cabin involving a member of our flight crew and several passengers who were mistreated." A few gasps could be heard. "We take this matter seriously. Airline SkyDominion does not and will never tolerate discrimination in any form, overt or subtle. We're grateful to those who spoke up, to those who supported with integrity, and we apologize to the family impacted by what occurred today." He released the button. No one said anything. Not a laugh. Not a whisper, just the quiet drone of engines and the low rumble of turbulence as the aircraft sliced through altitude. Then came the final act. A crew supervisor approached Emma, who sat alone on the jump seat, stiff, pale, still gripping her tablet as if it could protect her. The supervisor leaned in and whispered something that made her blink rapidly, her jaw trembling. She stood reluctantly, her posture now stripped of all authority, and gathered her personal items. The aisle cleared like a sea parting, and in full view of every passenger, Emma Holland was escorted toward the back of the aircraft, where a curtain was drawn shut behind her. It didn't slam. It didn't need to. The silence said more. Back in 8F, Layla turned the page of her sketchbook slowly, reverently, as if beginning again. This time, she drew not to escape, but to remember. She captured the outline of her father's jaw when he stood up, the shadow of her mother's hand shielding her brother, the sharp tilt of Richard Hale's brow when he stepped forward, and the folded hat in the captain's hand. A sketch of quiet justice, a moment that would not be erased. And as she sketched, something shifted in the cabin, an invisible tide turning. Passengers began to glance her way differently, not with pity, but with a kind of earned respect. Passengers sat straighter. Even the air felt different, less heavy with tension, more aware of consequence. The kind of silence that begged for closure, for a voice to crystallize what everyone had witnessed, but hadn't known how to name. And that voice came not from a captain, nor from a chairman, nor any uniformed authority figure. It came from the quietest passenger in the room, the 14-year-old girl who had endured humiliation, exile, and invisibility at 30,000 feet, and still managed to hold herself like glass that refused to crack. Layla Brooks rose slowly from seat 8F, her sketchbook still tucked under one arm, her shoulders squared. Richard Hale, standing near the front, noticed her movement and stepped back with a respectful nod, gesturing toward the small microphone mounted near the galley, a tool typically reserved for service announcements, not public reckoning. The entire cabin watched as Layla approached. Not a whisper followed her footsteps. Not a cough. Not even a seat creaked. She reached the mic, adjusted it to her height, and stood there for a second, gathering her breath. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice, when it came, was clear, not loud, but full, as if it echoed from somewhere older than her years. "I wasn't supposed to speak," she began. "I wasn't supposed to stand. I was supposed to sit in the back, be quiet, and wait until it was over. That's how people like her wanted it." A few heads turned instinctively toward the rear curtain, still drawn over where Emma had disappeared. But silence doesn't protect us. It protects them. Her gaze swept across the rows, businessmen in tailored suits, couples holding hands, older women with cashmere scarves, young professionals in earbuds. And for the first time, none of them looked away. When I asked for water, I was told I didn't belong. When my brother opened a birthday cupcake, it was taken from his hands like trash. My family was split up, our seats reassigned, because someone decided we were a problem, not based on anything we did, but based on who we are. Her voice wavered slightly there, but she didn't stop. You watched some of it. You heard most of it. Maybe you thought it wasn't your place to say something. Maybe you were scared. Maybe you didn't know what to say. I get it. I really do. She paused again, her chest rising with the deep breath of someone who knew this moment was larger than herself. But every time we stay silent when something wrong happens, we build a world where that wrong becomes normal. And I don't want to live in that world. Not now. Not when I'm 14. Not when I'm 40. Not ever. Someone in row 4 sniffled quietly. Another man dropped his gaze into his lap, shame flickering in his posture. Layla continued. I don't hate Emma. I don't wish her harm. I just want people to understand what harm looks like when it's dressed in a smile, in policy, in protocol. I want people to remember that justice doesn't just fall from the sky. Sometimes you have to climb up to meet it. Richard Hale's jaw tightened, visibly moved. James, from his seat, had turned completely to face his daughter, his eyes locked on her like he was seeing her for the very first time, not as his child, but as a voice the world could no longer ignore. Camille held Liam in her lap now, whispering softly to him, but her gaze never left Layla either. The silence returned, but it was different now, not heavy, not afraid. It was the silence of listening. Layla gave a small nod, then stepped back from the mic, returning to her seat without ceremony. No applause followed, no fanfare, just a shift, a deep internal acknowledgement among those present that something important had just been said, something undeniable. After a moment, Richard stepped back up and spoke into the mic, not to add, but to support. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your attention. Miss Brooks spoke the truth, and this airline is listening." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. As Layla settled back into 8F, she opened her sketchbook again. On the blank page, she began to draw a microphone, small, precise, centered. Around it, she shaded in silhouettes of faces, some watching, some listening, all changed. Not a symbol of power, but of courage, of what it looked like when a girl spoke and the sky finally listened. The wheels touched down with a soft double thud, and the aircraft rolled steadily along the tarmac under the pale morning light that bathed the runways of LAX in a quiet gold. The fastened seatbelt sign chimed off, but no one moved. Not yet. It wasn't the usual end-of-flight rustling of bags and coats, no impatient clicks of latches or scrambling to be first off the plane. This landing felt different. Not just a return to ground, but to gravity itself, the gravity of consequence, of clarity, of overdue justice. Layla closed her sketchbook, resting it gently on her lap, her fingers lingering over the front cover like she was sealing something sacred inside. Camille wrapped her arm around Liam, who was still sleepy, but alert enough to sense the shift in energy. James leaned forward in his seat, watching the exit door like a man prepared, not for confrontation, but resolution. And Emma Holland, who had spent the last hour hidden behind the rear curtain, sat expressionless in the last crew seat, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap they had gone white. She didn't move as the announcement came overhead, but her eyes lifted. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard Hale's voice carried through the intercom, calm, unwavering. "As we taxi to the gate, we ask all passengers in first class to remain seated. Representatives from SkyDominion Aviation will be boarding shortly for an operational review. Thank you for your patience." The words were neutral, sterile on the surface, but everyone in the cabin knew what they meant. A reckoning had landed with them. The plane came to a full stop. The seatbelt light dimmed. The door hissed and unsealed with a hydraulic groan. Then came the suits. 3 of them, 2 women and 1 man, sharp-eyed, wearing navy blazers embroidered with the SkyDominion emblem, stepped aboard with briefcases and digital tablets. They didn't address the passengers right away. They walked directly to the rear of the plane, where Emma waited. One of the women leaned in, whispered something. Emma's face collapsed, like glass under pressure. She shook her head once, then again, her mouth opening to protest, but no sound came. She stood slowly, defeated, and followed them down the aisle in full view. Her uniform still intact, but her power stripped bare. When she reached the front of the cabin, no one looked away. Not this time. Not even those who had once smirked at her jokes or turned blind eyes to her pettiness. A hush followed her all the way out, not of pity, but of finality. She was gone, and the door closed behind her like a sentence. Richard Hale stepped forward now, not as CEO, but as a man willing to put action behind every word spoken on this flight. To all passengers, he said, addressing the cabin with calm authority, "We thank you for your cooperation today." Effective immediately, former lead flight attendant Emma Holland has been terminated for gross misconduct. Furthermore, any passengers who were recorded supporting or encouraging her discriminatory behavior will be placed under review by our ethical travel panel. Repeat violators will receive permanent flight bans on all SkyDominion services, domestic and international. A ripple of tension passed through the seats, not fear, but accountability. He continued, "We are also proud to announce the launch of Justice in Flight, a new division within SkyDominion that will directly address bias in customer service, train frontline staff in cultural competency, and monitor equity across all levels of operation. This program will be co-chaired by 2 founding members of this company, James and Camille Brooks." James blinked. Camille gasped softly. Richard smiled at them. If they're willing. James stood, slowly, locking eyes with his old friend. We're willing, he said. As long as it's not just for show. It won't be, Richard promised. It starts today. The cabin broke into quiet applause, not explosive, not performative, but full of relief and quiet respect. Even passengers from coach, now filtering into view through the dividing curtain, looked on with curiosity and quiet awe. Justice had taken flight, and now it was landing. Layla stepped into the aisle, her sketchbook hugged to her chest. As she moved toward the exit, passengers made way, not out of obligation, but deference. One by one, strangers who had looked through her earlier now nodded. Some softly said thank you. Others simply smiled. But the message was the same. They had heard her. As the Brooks family descended onto the jet bridge, a group of Sky Dominion staff stood waiting at the gate, not to apologize, but to honor. Applause greeted them, not for being wealthy or powerful or connected, but for being human in a place that had tried to deny them that very thing. A young employee handed Layla a black folder. Inside it, a formal printed copy of the speech she had given, already titled, At 30,000 Feet, a Passenger's Truth. Beneath it, a handwritten note from Richard Hale. This isn't the end. It's the beginning. Keep speaking. Layla didn't say a word. She just smiled, a quiet, earned, unshakable smile, and followed her family into the terminal, leaving behind the sky that had once tried to forget her, and now would never be allowed to. The end. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that uncover truth where it's least expected. We want to hear from you. What part of this story hit you the hardest? Which moment stayed with you long after it passed? And where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop a comment below. Let's talk about justice, courage, and what it really means to stand your ground at 30,000 feet.